Hello, and a huge welcome to the channel. If you're looking for cross-dressing stories that are emotional, intriguing, and truly empowering, you've come to the right place.
If you had asked me a month ago to describe my life, I would have given you the standard, rehearsed answer: I'm Ethan Carter, 30 years old, a decent mid-level management job, a nice house in the suburbs, and a gorgeous, intelligent wife named Clara. I was the picture of normal, the guy you wave to while mowing the lawn. But normal is a fragile thing, isn't it? It's just a mask you wear until it gets too heavy. And God, mine was getting heavy. Years ago, right before Clara and I got married, I made a confession. It was late. We'd had a bit too much wine, and the guilt of keeping a secret from the woman I loved was eating me alive. I told her that sometimes, when I was completely alone. I liked to wear women's clothes. I spilled it all out, the shame, the confusion, the bizarre sense of peace it gave me. Clara had been quiet, not angry, just quiet. The next morning, terrified I had ruined everything, I backpedaled hard. I told her it was a stupid phase, a weird fetish I was entirely done with. I shoved that part of me into a mental steel box, welded it shut, and threw away the key. Or so I thought. You can't just bury a piece of your identity and expect it to stay dead. It claws at the dirt. It whispers to you when you're staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. A few months ago, the box cracked. I started slipping. It was just small things at first, buying a pair of fishnet stockings and hiding them at the very back of my sock drawer. Putting on a touch of clear lip gloss in the bathroom mirror before hurriedly wiping it off. I thought I was being a ghost. Totally undetectable. I was an idiot. Clara found the fishnets. I don't know exactly when, but I noticed they had been moved just a fraction of an inch. Then there was the tissue. I had panicked after trying out a cherry red lipstick I'd impulsively bought at a drugstore 2 towns over, wiped it off, and stupidly buried it in the middle of the bathroom trash can. Clara takes out the bathroom trash. Gah! What the hell was I thinking? Was I secretly wanting to get caught? I spent weeks waiting for the explosion. I waited for her to confront me, to scream, to call me a freak, or to slam divorce papers down on the kitchen table. My anxiety was through the roof. I couldn't look her in the eye. I flinched when she walked into the room. I was completely, utterly disconnected, trapped in my own terrified head. But the explosion never came. Instead of fighting, Clara started observing. I'd catch her watching me from the doorway while I pretended to read a book. She wasn't looking at me with disgust or pity. It was something deeper. It was a terrifying, piercing empathy. I didn't know it then. But she had been spending her evenings reading. Not tabloid trash or weird internet forums, but actual psychology. Stories from people like me. She wasn't looking for a weapon to use against me. She was trying to understand the war I was fighting inside myself. Then came the ambush. Pack a bag, she had said last Tuesday, dropping a pair of plane tickets onto my lap. We're going to Maui. 5 days. I already cleared it with your boss. I hadn't argued. A vacation sounded like a lifeline. A chance to hit the reset button on our strained marriage. I figured we'd drink Mai Tais, sit on the beach, and maybe, just maybe, I could push the ghost of that girl back into the dark where she belonged. Fast forward to our first evening in the hotel. The room was stunning. Ocean view, a warm Hawaiian breeze fluttering the sheer white curtains, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. I was standing on the balcony, taking a deep breath, actually feeling relaxed for the first time in months. Ethan, Clara called from inside the room. Her voice was incredibly soft. Yeah, I turned around, sliding the glass door shut behind me. She was standing next to the massive, dark wood wardrobe. The doors were wide open. I took the liberty of packing some things for this trip, she said, her eyes locked onto mine. Things I knew you wouldn't have the courage to buy, let alone pack. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, then immediately started hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mouth went bone dry. I took a slow, hesitant step into the room, my eyes drifting from Clara's calm face to the open wardrobe. It wasn't my khakis. It wasn't my button-down shirts or my boring gray slacks. Hanging neatly on the wooden hangers was a collection of clothes that made my breath hitch. A sleek emerald green slip dress, a floral sundress with thin spaghetti straps, a sheer silk robe, and beneath them, laid out perfectly on the bottom shelf, were delicate pieces of lace lingerie, a makeup bag, and a pair of strappy heels. Clara, I choked out, my voice cracking. What? What is this? Denial. My brain immediately defaulted to denial. It was instinct. I don't know what you're doing, I stammered, taking a step back, suddenly feeling like the room was shrinking. If this is a joke, it's not funny, I told you. That stuff is in the past. I don't do that anymore. I'm just Ethan. I'm your husband. I was lying through my teeth, and we both knew it. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just closed the distance between us, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet, and gently took both of my trembling hands in hers. Ethan, look at me, she whispered. I was staring at the floor, fighting back a sudden, overwhelming urge to cry. The shame was burning my cheeks, hot and prickly. Look at me, she repeated, giving my hands a gentle squeeze. Slowly, agonizingly, I lifted my gaze to meet hers. There was no judgment in her brown eyes. None, just a deep, terrifyingly absolute acceptance. I saw the tension, she said softly. I saw how you've been shrinking into yourself. I saw the fishnets, I saw the lipstick, and I saw how terrified you were that I would hate you for it. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Clara, I tried to stop. I really did. Stop apologizing, she said, her thumbs gently tracing the backs of my knuckles. You've been suffocating yourself to keep me comfortable. I don't want that. I don't want half of a husband who's slowly dying inside because he's too afraid to breathe. She let go of one of my hands, reaching up to gently brush a stray piece of hair away from my forehead. Her touch sent a shiver straight down my spine. You don't have to hide from me anymore, Clara said, her voice steady and clear. She turned her head, gesturing toward the open wardrobe, toward the silk and the lace and the terrifying, beautiful freedom waiting inside it. When she looked back at me, a soft, encouraging smile played on her lips. Tonight, she whispered, her words hanging in the warm island air, rewriting the rules of my entire universe. I don't want you as Ethan. I want to meet her. My knees felt weak. The steel box inside my head didn't just crack this time. It shattered completely. I was terrified. God, I was so terrified. But as I looked at the emerald dress hanging in the closet, a tiny buried part of my soul finally exhaled. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, rooted to the plush hotel carpet. The warm Hawaiian breeze blowing in from the balcony suddenly felt like a physical weight against my skin. My mind was a chaotic static of panic, denial, and a desperate, buried yearning that I had spent years trying to suffocate. I don't know how, I whispered, the admission tasting like ash in my mouth. I don't know what to do. Clara smiled. It wasn't a pitying smile, nor was it the indulgent look you give a child playing make-believe. It was warm, grounded, and infinitely patient. I know, she said, stepping closer and taking my hand. That's why I'm here. Come with me. She led me into the massive, brilliantly lit master bathroom. The marble floor was cool against my bare feet. Clara reached into a sleek leather toiletry bag I hadn't noticed before and began pulling things out, lining them up on the granite counter. A fresh razor, a tube of luxurious, thick shaving cream, a jar of exfoliating scrub, body lotion that smelled faintly of vanilla and jasmine. If we're going to do this, Clara said softly, turning on the water in the glass-enclosed shower, we're going to do it right. The canvas needs to be clear. Stripping in front of my wife had never been an issue, but taking off my clothes in that moment felt entirely different. I wasn't undressing for intimacy. I was shedding my armor. I stepped into the hot spray of the shower, my hands trembling. Clara handed me the razor and the cream. Shaving my face was a daily chore. Shaving my chest, my arms, my legs that was an excavation. As I pulled the blade up my calf, watching the dark hair swirl down the drain. A strange, breathless anxiety gripped my chest. Without the hair, my legs looked leaner, softer, vulnerable. When I finally stepped out of the shower, my skin pink and tingling, Clara handed me a thick towel and the jar of lotion. Rub it in everywhere, she instructed gently. The sensation of the lotion on bare, smooth skin was electric. I had lived in this body for 30 years, but as my hands glided over my own hairless arms and legs, it felt like I was touching a stranger. When I was dry, Clara brought in the first layers. I had bought women's underwear before, Usually cheap things bought in a panic and thrown away a week later in a fit of guilt. But what Clara handed me was different. A pair of delicate black lace panties and a matching bralette. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped them. Stepping into the panties, pulling the soft lace up over my hips. The contrast to my usual loose cotton boxers was jarring. They were snug, holding me in a way that felt entirely foreign, yet bizarrely comforting. Clara stepped behind me, her cool fingers brushing against my spine as she hooked the bralette. The slight tension across my chest wasn't restrictive. It felt like a gentle embrace. It felt like being held. Then came the emerald dress. I raised my arms, and Clara slipped the silk over my head. The fabric cascaded down my freshly shaven skin like cool water. As she pulled the hidden zipper up the small of my back, I experienced a bizarre physical shift. The cut of the dress gripped my waist and flared slightly at the hips, suggesting a silhouette I didn't naturally possess. Without thinking, my posture changed. I had to stand taller, pull my shoulders back, align my spine differently to let the silk drape properly. "It," Clara murmured, pointing to the vanity stool. I obeyed, staring blindly at my lap as she arranged a sprawling array of makeup brushes, palettes, and small glass bottles. I was rigid, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for the mockery, waiting for the moment she would realize how absurd this was. But Clara just tilted my chin up. "Close your eyes, Ethan, just breathe." I closed them. The next hour was a sensory blur of incredible intimacy, the soft, sweeping strokes of a foundation brush evening out my skin, the light pressure of a sponge, the delicate, precise tickle of an eyeliner pencil tracing my lash line, the sweep of mascara, the gentle dab of color on my lips. Clara worked in total silence. The only sounds the soft clinking of makeup lids and the rhythmic crashing of the ocean outside. Every brushstroke felt less like a disguise being applied, and more like an old heavy mask being chipped away. "Okay," Clara whispered. Her hands moved to the back of my head. I felt the tight, secure grip of a wig cap, followed by the sudden, heavy cascade of hair falling around my shoulders. It was dark, styled and loose. Natural waves that framed my jawline perfectly. Open them. I didn't want to. God, I was terrified. What if I looked like a clown? What if I looked like a pathetic man in a dress? What if seeing it made Clara finally snap and realize she had made a terrible mistake? I took a shaky breath, gripped the edges of the vanity stool, and slowly opened my eyes to the mirror. My breath caught in my throat. The room spun for a fraction of a second. The person looking back at me wasn't Ethan Carter. Not exactly. The harsh lines of my face had been softened by the makeup. The dark, flowing hair completely altered the shape of my head. The emerald silk caught the light, highlighting the smooth skin of my shoulders and the delicate lace peeking out at my neckline. It was clumsy. My shoulders were a bit too broad. My hands resting on my lap felt too large. But beneath the awkwardness, looking out from behind my own eyes, was a woman. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the bathroom. I stared at her. She stared back. The terror was still there, buzzing in the back of my skull. But it was being rapidly overshadowed by a tidal wave of emotion I had no name for. It was a profound, terrifying, earth-shattering sense of rightness. "Who is she?" Clara asked softly, standing right behind me, our eyes meeting in the mirror. I swallowed hard. I had never spoken the name out loud. I had only ever whispered it in the darkest, most secret corners of my mind when the urge to cross-dress had been too much to bear. "Lena," I whispered, my voice trembling, sounding an octave higher than usual. "Her name is Lena." I waited for the judgment. I waited to feel ashamed. But Clara didn't laugh. She didn't look at me with pity. She simply placed her hands on my bare, silk-draped shoulders and squeezed gently. "It's very nice to finally meet you, Lena," Clara said, her voice thick with genuine emotion. Looking at my reflection, watching the tears well up in my mascara-coated eyes, I realized the terrifying truth. Ethan hadn't put on a costume. Lena had just taken her first breath. The silence in the bathroom was thick, heavy with the weight of 30 years of suppressed truth. I was still staring at the mirror, my chest rising and falling beneath the emerald silk, trying to reconcile the mind of Ethan with the reflection of Lena. Then, Clara broke the spell, not by pulling me back, but by pushing me forward. "Let's go for a walk," she said, her voice entirely too casual for the absolute panic that statement ignited in my veins. I whipped my head around to face her. nearly losing my balance. "What out there? Clara, no, 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 I can't. Look at me. I'm a guy in a dress. People will stare. They'll laugh. Or take pictures. Or, Ethan, stop!" She didn't yell, but the firmness in her tone cut through my spiraling anxiety. She walked out into the bedroom and returned a moment later holding a pair of strappy, nude sandals with a modest 2-inch block heel. She set them on the floor at my feet. "I'm not asking you to walk into a crowded bar," she said gently. "Just the resort's private beach path. It's dark, it's quiet, but you need to feel what this is like outside of a locked room. Otherwise, this is just a costume you take off when you get scared." My hands were freezing. I looked from the shoes to the door, feeling like I was being asked to step off a cliff. But then I looked back at Clara. She wasn't pushing me to embarrass me. She was offering me a door I had spent my whole life being too terrified to open. Swallowing the lump of absolute terror in my throat, I slipped my bare feet into the sandals. Clara knelt and fastened the delicate buckles around my ankles. Standing up was a revelation. 2 inches isn't a massive height difference, but the arch of the shoe entirely shifted my center of gravity. My calves tightened. I had to tilt my pelvis slightly and pull my shoulders back just to stay upright. The dress, which had hung perfectly before, now fell differently, the silk skimming over my thighs in a way that made me acutely aware of my own skin. "Ready?" Clara asked, offering her arm. I nodded, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The walk down the hotel corridor was agonizing. Every click of my heels on the tile felt like a gunshot echoing through the quiet hall. I kept my head down, waiting for a door to swing open, waiting for a family to step out and freeze in horror. But the hallway remained empty. Then came the elevator. We stepped inside, and I stared at the metal doors as the numbers ticked down to the lobby. "Please be empty. Please be empty," I chanted silently. When the door slid open, the lobby wasn't empty. There were people reading on sofas, a couple arguing quietly near the concierge desk, and a bellhop pushing a cart. I froze, my instincts screaming at me to run back to the room, to rip the wig off, to scrub my face clean. Ethan was screaming, but Clara just linked her arm through mine, smiled casually, and guided me forward. I had to walk. I couldn't do my usual heavy, shoulder-first masculine stride. The heels simply wouldn't allow it. To keep from twisting an ankle, I had to place one foot directly in front of the other. By necessity, my hips began to sway slightly to absorb the motion. It felt clumsy, like a newborn foal trying to find its legs, but within a dozen steps, instinct took over. The stiffness began to melt. I softened my knees. I let the movement travel up my spine. We walked right through the lobby and out the massive glass doors. No one pointed. No one gasped. Stepping out into the balmy Hawaiian night was a sensory shock for my entire life. Going outside meant being wrapped in denim, thick cotton, and heavy leather shoes. Now, the warm coastal wind rushed freely against my bare, freshly shaven legs. The thin silk of the dress fluttered, brushing against my thighs like a phantom touch. I felt the cool air on my chest, my neck, my shoulders. I felt exposed, completely undefended by the heavy armor of men's clothing. It was terrifying, and it was the most liberating feeling I had ever experienced. We walked side by side along the dimly lit promenade that hugged the shoreline. The sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks provided a steady rhythm to the clicking of my heels. With every step, the suffocating grip of my anxiety loosened a fraction. "You're doing beautifully," Clara murmured, leaning her head briefly against my shoulder. "I feel like I'm glowing in the dark," I whispered back, my voice hushed, terrified of speaking too loudly and giving myself away. "I feel like everyone knows." "They don't," she assured me. Just as she said it, a group of 3 older women walking in the opposite direction approached us. My breath hitched. I squeezed Clara's arm, bracing for the weird looks, the double takes, the whispered comments. I instinctively tried to shrink into myself, a defensive posture I'd perfected over a lifetime. As they passed, one of the women, wearing a bright floral muumuu, caught my eye. She didn't glare, she didn't squint. She just offered a warm, polite smile. "Beautiful evening, ladies," she said casually, not missing a beat. "It really is," Clara replied effortlessly. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a shy smile breaking through the tension on my face. "Ladies," The word echoed in my skull. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't looked closer. She just saw two women walking by the ocean. The validation hit me like a physical blow. The panic that had been burning a hole in my stomach began to cool, transforming into a strange, intoxicating buzz. A few minutes later, a man walked past us. He was my age, wearing a crisp linen shirt, as we crossed paths under the glow of a tiki torch. His eyes flicked over Clara, then landed on me. He didn't look at me the way men look at other men that brief, assessing nod of acknowledgement. His gaze lingered. It dropped to the neckline of the emerald dress, swept down to my legs, and came back up to my face. It was a split-second interaction, but it sent a hot electric jolt straight down my spine. It wasn't predatory, but it was unmistakably appreciative. He was looking at me, and he liked what he saw. I felt my cheeks flush beneath the makeup. My heart wasn't racing from fear anymore. It was racing from a dangerous, thrilling rush of adrenaline. I consciously adjusted my posture, letting my hips sway just a fraction more as we walked away. Clara noticed. She didn't say anything, but I saw the corner of her mouth turn up in a knowing smile. We stopped by a low stone wall overlooking the dark, churning water. I rested my hands on the cool stone, feeling the breeze tangle in the heavy strands of my wig. I looked out at the horizon, but my mind was entirely focused inward. The fear of discovery was vanishing. The world hadn't ended, the sky hadn't fallen. People had looked at me, and instead of seeing a man failing to hide, they had simply seen Lena. I closed my eyes, the salty air filling my lungs. A profound, terrifying question bloomed in the quiet space where my panic used to be. If nobody out here knew Ethan existed, and if being here, in this silk dress, feeling the wind on my skin, felt more natural than anything I had ever done in my entire life, then who the hell was I? The second night in Maui, the silence between us shifted. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of a secret finally exposed, but a strange, crackling anticipation. Clara didn't ask me if I wanted to be Lena again. She simply laid a different dress on the bed after we returned from a day of hiking this time. A deep burgundy wrap dress that hugged the waist and plunged slightly lower at the neckline. "There's a luau tonight," she announced casually, pulling her own hair into a messy bun in the mirror. Open bar, fire dancers. It's supposed to be incredible. My stomach did a violent flip. The promenade walk had been one thing a dimly lit, quiet stroll where interactions were fleeting and easily avoided. A luau was a crowded, loud, and inherently social event. It meant standing under bright lights, sitting at tables with strangers, and talking. The thought of my deeper voice betraying the illusion Clara had so meticulously painted made my palms sweat instantly. "Clara, I can't," I stammered, staring at the burgundy fabric as if it might bite me. Walking in the dark is one thing. Being around hundreds of people, they'll hear me. They'll look closely. I'll ruin it. Clara stopped brushing her hair and turned to me. Her expression was completely unreadable for a moment before she smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips. "You didn't ruin it last night, Ethan. And besides," she picked up a sleek black makeup bag and tossed it onto the bed next to the dress. "Tonight, we're doing the eyes a little differently. You won't have to hide in the shadows." The makeup process was longer this time. Clara was meticulous, blending shades of bronze and smoky charcoal around my eyes until they looked larger, sharper, almost predatory. The burgundy dress wrapped tightly around my torso, the fabric cinching exactly where it needed to, creating the illusion of a curve I didn't naturally possess. The heels she chose were a half-inch higher than the previous nights, forcing my posture even more rigidly upright, my chest thrust slightly forward, my hips jutting out to maintain balance. When I finally looked in the mirror, the shock was profound. This wasn't the hesitant, terrified Lena from the night before. The dark eyes, the bold lip, the way the dress clung to my frame, it was undeniably feminine. But there was an edge to it, a quiet, terrifying confidence that Ethan Carter had never possessed in his life. "You look stunning," Clara whispered, resting her chin on my shoulder. I struggled for the word, my voice barely a breath. "I don't look like me." "That's the point," she replied, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. "Let's go." The luau was a riot of color, noise, and heat. Tiki torches blazed against the darkening sky, casting long, dancing shadows over the sand. Music pulsed from a live band on a small stage, blending with the laughter and chatter of hundreds of tourists. The air smelled of roasting pork, tropical flowers, and sunscreen. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as we approached the entrance. I instinctively reached for Clara's hand, my grip white-knuckled. She squeezed back but gently pulled away as we neared the greeting line. "Two," Clara said to the hostess, a young woman with a vibrant flower tucked behind her ear. The hostess beamed, placing 2 intricate leis over our heads. "Aloha, ladies welcome. You look beautiful tonight." I forced a stiff nod, terrified to open my mouth. The scent of the plumeria lei wrapped around my neck was intoxicating, a physical reminder of the role I was playing. We were seated at a long communal table, squeezed in among a large family from Texas and a young couple on their honeymoon. "I'm going to grab us some drinks," Clara announced loudly over the music, standing up almost immediately. "Mai Tais sound good." "Wait," I hissed, grabbing her wrist, genuine panic flaring in my eyes. "Don't leave me here, please." "You'll be fine," she said, her smile utterly serene, completely ignoring my terror. "Just smile and nod, I'll be right back." She vanished into the crowd, leaving me stranded in a sea of strangers, wearing a dress that felt suddenly very tight and very conspicuous. I crossed my legs tightly at the ankles, tucking my hands into my lap, trying to make myself as small as possible. My chest felt tight, the restrictive band of the bralette reminding me of the charade with every breath. First time in Maui. The voice came from my right. It was deep, resonant, and directed squarely at me. I turned my head slowly, every muscle tense. Sitting next to me was a man in his late 30s, wearing a slightly unbuttoned linen shirt that revealed a hint of a tan chest. He had a strong jaw, dark hair, and a smile that was undeniably charming. I croaked, my voice sounding strained and unnatural even to my own ears. I cleared my throat, terrified of speaking again. "It's my third," the man continued, completely oblivious to my internal meltdown. He extended a hand across the table. "I'm Ryan. By the way, Ryan Cole." My brain screamed at me to run, to bolt for the exit and hide in the hotel room until the flight home. But my body, somehow, didn't move. My hand, the nails carefully painted a subtle nude shade by Clara earlier that day, reached out and took his. I hesitated, the name Ethan hovering on the tip of my tongue, fighting for dominance. But as I looked at Ryan, at the way his eyes were focused entirely on my face, the way his gaze briefly flicked down to the neckline of my dress, Ethan felt entirely wrong. Ethan didn't belong here. "Lena," I breathed, the words slipping out before I could stop it. The pitch of my voice was higher, softer than usual, born of sheer terror. But to Ryan, it must have sounded perfectly normal. "Lena," he repeated, his smile widening. "Beautiful name for a beautiful woman." The compliment landed like a physical blow. A hot electric jolt shot straight down my spine, pooling in the pit of my stomach. Ethan would have laughed, made a self-deprecating joke, deflected the attention entirely. But Lena felt a terrifying, intoxicating surge of power. The panic that had been drowning me suddenly receded, replaced by a bizarre, thrilling awareness of my own body. The way the dress hugged my waist, the way the makeup made my eyes pop, the sheer, undeniable fact that a handsome man was looking at me, speaking to me, entirely convinced that I was exactly what I appeared to be. "Thank you," I said, a soft, involuntary smile touching my lips. My voice, though still quiet, held a trace of genuine warmth. For the next 10 minutes, until Clara finally returned with the drinks, I talked to Ryan Cole. I kept my answers short, my voice low and breathy to mask the deeper tones, letting him carry the conversation. He asked about my trip, recommended a snorkeling spot, and complimented the color of my dress, noting how it brought out the color of my eyes. Every word, every look, every subtle shift in his posture toward me was a revelation. It was the female gaze, experienced from the inside out. I wasn't an invisible, unremarkable man anymore. I was seen, I was desired. When Clara finally slid into the seat next to me, handing me a sweating glass garnished with a pineapple wedge, she didn't say a word. She just took a sip of her own drink and shot me a sideways glance, an amused sparkle in her eye. The rest of the night was a blur of fire dancers, loud music, and the heavy, sweet scent of roasting pork. But my focus remained entirely shattered. Ethan, the man who had boarded the plane a few days ago, was screaming in the background of my mind, horrified by the deception, terrified of the implications of what I was doing. But Lena was sipping a Mai Tai, her legs crossed delicately under the table, occasionally catching Ryan's eye and offering a shy, demure smile. Lena was thriving. And the most terrifying part of all wasn't the lie I was telling Ryan, or the secret I was keeping from the world. The most terrifying part was how desperately, how completely, I didn't want the night to end. The walk back to our hotel room was a blur. The adrenaline from the luau, from the noise and the fire and the undeniable weight of Ryan's gaze, was still rushing through my veins like a tidal wave. Every click of my heels against the pavement felt deliberate. A rhythm I was finally learning how to ride. I was hyper-aware of the coastal breeze playing with the hem of the burgundy dress, of the way my hips swayed without me having to force them. When Clara finally slid the keycard into the door and the heavy wooden panel clicked shut behind us, the silence of the room was deafening. The air conditioning was a stark contrast to the humid Hawaiian night. I stood in the center of the room, my chest rising and falling, staring blindly at the dark ocean through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I felt a sudden, crushing wave of guilt. I had just spent an hour making conversation with another man, actively leaning into his attention, letting him flirt with me. Ethan, the loyal, predictable husband, was horrified. He was screaming that I had crossed a line, that I was making a fool of myself, of our marriage. But I couldn't hear him very well. His voice was muffled, drowned out by the thrumming, undeniable electricity still lingering in my fingertips. Clara walked past me, kicking off her sandals, and turned on the soft lamps framing the bed. She didn't look angry. She didn't look jealous. She just watched me for a long moment, her eyes tracing the rigid line of my shoulders. "Did it feel real?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, cutting straight through the noise in my head. I swallowed hard, slowly turning to face her. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say it was a terrifying mistake, a bizarre social experiment that I was desperate to escape. But looking into Clara's eyes, the woman who had bought me this dress, who had painted my face, who had held my hand through the terror, I couldn't. Yes, I breathed, the word trembling on my lips. God, Clara. Yes. She nodded, a small, soft smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Come here," she murmured, gesturing toward the bathroom. "Let's get you out of this." Standing in front of the massive vanity mirror, the reality of the night hit me. The woman staring back at me was flushed, her dark eyes wide and bright, the bold lip color still perfectly intact. She looked vibrant. She looked alive. Clara stepped behind me and reached for the hidden zipper of the dress. The metallic hiss sounded incredibly loud as the fabric loosened, slipping off my shoulders and pooling at my waist. A sudden sharp ache blossomed in my chest. Taking off the dress didn't feel like removing a costume anymore. It felt like an eviction. I unhooked the bralette, letting it fall to the floor. Clara handed me a makeup wipe, her touch feather light against my bare shoulder. I sat down on the stool, staring at my reflection. My hand hovered over my face. I remembered all those nights in our master bathroom back home, scrubbing at my mouth with rough toilet paper, desperate to erase the evidence of my shame before Clara could wake up. I used to scrub until my skin was raw, frantic to bring Ethan back. Tonight, my hand was shaking for a completely different reason. I didn't want her to go. I pressed the cold, damp wipe to my eye, dragging it across the lid, the charcoal shadow and heavy mascara smeared, turning into a muddy gray streak down my cheek. I did the other eye, then the lips. With every swipe, the illusion fractured, the sharp feminine mystique washed away, leaving behind the harsher, more angular lines of my jaw. The slight stubble that had managed to push through the skin over the last few hours became visible. Finally, I reached up and pulled the wig cap off. My short, practical men's haircut sprang back to life. I sat there, half naked, my face stripped bare, staring at the man in the mirror. Ethan was back, but looking at him now, I felt a profound, hollow disconnect. The man in the glass looked tired. He looked safe, acceptable, and completely hollowed out. A choked sob tore out of my throat before I could stop it. I dropped the blackened makeup wipe onto the counter and buried my face in my hands, my shoulders shaking violently. It wasn't a hysterical cry. It was a deep foundational fracture. Everything I had built my life on was cracking wide open. Ethan, Clara was kneeling beside me instantly, her arms wrapped around my bare waist, her cheek pressing against my back. She didn't shush me. She just held me as the dam finally broke. "I'm sorry," I gasped. the tears slipping through my fingers. "I'm so sorry. Clara, I don't know what's happening to me." "You have nothing to apologize for," she whispered fiercely into my skin. "Talk to me. Tell me what's going on in that head of yours." I took a shuddering breath, slowly lowering my hands. I looked at our reflection, my broad, masculine shoulders, Clara clinging to me, anchoring me to the earth. "It's not just the clothes," I confessed, the words spilling out of me, raw and unpolished. I thought it was for years. I told myself it was just a stupid fetish, a weird thrill I got from silk and lace. But tonight, when he looked at me, Clara, when Ryan looked at me, I didn't feel like a man playing a trick. I didn't feel like a pervert. I turned my head, looking down at my wife. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears, but her gaze was unwavering. I felt like I was finally letting myself exist, I whispered, my voice breaking. For the first time in my life, I felt beautiful, and taking it off just now, it felt like I was killing her. It felt like I was putting myself back in a cage. I waited for the rejection. I waited for Clara to finally realize that this was too much, that her husband was entirely broken, that our marriage was a casualty of this bizarre awakening. Instead, she reached up, her cool fingers gently cupping my jaw, her thumb wiping away a stray tear that had mixed with the remnants of my foundation. "I know," Clara said softly. You're not angry about Ryan?" I asked, the guilt still gnawing at the edges of my relief. "I let another man flirt with me right in front of you." Clara let out a wet, genuine laugh, shaking her head. "Ethan, I sent you to the bar knowing exactly what was going to happen. I watched you from across the room. I watched the way you sat, the way you smiled." Her expression softened into something impossibly tender. "I have loved you for 8 years. I know every expression you have, and I have never, not once in our entire relationship, seen you glow the way you did tonight. The air left my lungs. You weren't cheating on me." She continued, her thumb stroking my cheekbone. "You were meeting yourself. How could I ever be angry at that?" I collapsed forward, burying my face in the crook of her neck, holding on to her like she was the only solid thing left in the universe. She held me back just as tightly. In that bathroom, stripped of the silk, the makeup, and the wig, I realized the terrifying, beautiful truth. Lena wasn't a ghost that possessed me when I put on a dress. She was the marrow in my bones. She was the breath in my lungs. And Ethan wasn't dead. He just wasn't alone anymore. The box was gone. And for the first time in my 30 years on Earth, staring into the dark unknown of what our lives were about to become, I wasn't afraid. The flight back from Maui was quiet, punctuated only by the low hum of the jet engines and the occasional rattle of the beverage cart. I stared out the tiny oval window at the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, a cold knot of dread slowly tightening in my stomach. Vacations are bubbles. They exist outside of time, suspended in a reality where the rules of your normal life don't apply. Hawaii was a safe vacuum, but waiting for us at the end of this flight was our 2-story suburban house, my mid-level management job, our neighbors, and the suffocating weight of my 30-year-old routine. I was terrified that the moment I turned the key in our front door, the steel box in my mind would rebuild itself, trapping Lena back in the dark. I squeezed my eyes shut, resting my forehead against the cool plastic of the window. Clara's hand slipped across the armrest, her fingers interlacing with mine. She didn't say anything, she just held on, anchoring me. The first 3 days back home, I was Ethan, entirely Ethan. I put on my suits. I drove to the office. I sat in agonizingly long marketing meetings, and I drank my black coffee. I fell back into the rigid, square-shouldered posture that I had perfected over a lifetime. But something was off. The suit felt like sandpaper. The deep, booming voice I used to project authority in the boardroom sounded like a stranger echoing in a cavern. I wasn't just wearing a uniform anymore. I was wearing a disguise. It happened on a rainy Thursday night. Clara was downstairs reading a novel, the soft jazz from the living room speakers floating up the staircase. I was standing in our walk-in closet, staring dead-eyed at a pair of gray sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt. I couldn't do it. My skin literally crawled at the thought of putting them on. My eyes drifted to the far corner of Clara's side of the closet, tucked away, but not hidden, were the things we had brought back from the island. My heart did that familiar, frantic flutter against my ribs. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and bypassed the sweatpants. Instead, I pulled out a pair of high-waisted, soft black leggings and an oversized, off-the-shoulder knit sweater Clara had bought specifically for me before the trip. I didn't bother with the wig. I didn't spend an hour meticulously applying foundation and eyeliner. I just wanted to breathe. I slipped off my boxers and pulled the leggings up. The spandex hugged my calves, my thighs, my waist, providing that gentle, secure compression I had craved for days. I pulled the sweater over my head, letting it slouch off one of my bare shoulders. I looked in the full-length mirror. It was just me, no heavy makeup, no illusion of long hair, just Ethan's face atop a distinctly feminine silhouette. And yet, the moment the fabric settled against my skin, my body remembered. The rigid tension in my spine melted away. My shoulders dropped, rolling back naturally. When I turned to leave the closet, I didn't walk with the heavy, purposeful thud of a man. My steps were lighter, my weight shifting fluidly from the ball of my foot to my heel. It wasn't an act, it wasn't a performance for a dark Hawaiian beach or a crowded luau. It was just my body, finally allowed to exist in its natural frequency. I walked downstairs. Clara looked up from her book as I entered the living room. She took in the leggings, the sweater, the bare shoulder. Her eyes softened, crinkling at the corners. "Tea?" she asked casually, as if I had walked down in my usual sweatpants. "Please," I said. My voice was softer, stripped of the forced baritone I used at work. I sat down on the sofa, tucking my legs beneath me, a posture I would have never allowed myself to take a month ago. Clara handed me a mug, and we just sat there, listening to the rain. There was no grand revelation, no emotional breakdown. It was just domestic. It was normal, and that normalcy was the most revolutionary thing I had ever experienced. Over the next few weeks, the boundaries began to stretch. What started as quiet Thursday nights turned into entire weekends. Lena stopped being a secret identity I only put on when the curtains were drawn. She started doing the laundry. She started cooking Sunday morning pancakes in a sheer robe and bare feet. But the real test came a month later. "We need groceries," Clara announced one Saturday morning, tossing the car keys onto the kitchen island. "And I want to go to that boutique in the next town over, the one with the amazing summer dresses. Get dressed." I froze, the spatula in my hand hovering over a frying pan. "Get dressed," I echoed, "like Ethan." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Are you Ethan right now?" I looked down. I was wearing a pair of denim short shorts and a fitted white tank top. My toenails painted a glossy cherry red. "No." "Then get dressed," she smiled. The panic flared, sharp and icy. The next town over wasn't Hawaii. It was 45 minutes away. It was real life. But the thought of scrubbing off the nail polish, of putting on stiff jeans and a polo shirt, made me physically nauseous. An hour later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of our SUV. I was wearing a simple knee-length floral skirt, a fitted blouse, and a pair of ballet flats. My wig was brushed and styled, falling perfectly around my lightly made-up face. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. When we pulled into the crowded shopping center, I couldn't move. My hand hovered over the door handle. "Ethan," Clara started softly. "Lena," I interrupted, my voice shaking but stubbornly holding its ground. "Out here. If I'm doing this, it's Lena." Clara beamed. "Okay, Lena, let's go buy some dresses." Stepping out of the car felt like stepping onto a tightrope without a net. The afternoon sun was blinding. We walked toward the boutique, my flats clicking softly against the concrete. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, terrified of intercepting a glare or a disgusted sneer. We walked into a small, upscale coffee shop next to the boutique first. Clara ordered, and I stood slightly behind her, clutching my purse with white knuckles. "And a vanilla latte for my sister," Clara said smoothly to the teenage boy behind the counter. The boy didn't even blink. He scribbled on a cup, tapped the screen, and looked at me. "Whipped cream on that, ma'am." The world stopped spinning. The background noise of the cafe faded into static. "Ma'am." He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't looked twice. He just saw a tall woman standing with her sister. "Yes, please," I breathed, offering him a radiant, blinding smile. That afternoon changed everything. I tried on dresses in the women's fitting room. I walked through the aisles of a grocery store, my hips swaying naturally as I pushed the cart. The fear of being discovered didn't vanish entirely. It still buzzed like a low-voltage wire in the back of my mind, but it was entirely eclipsed by the sheer, intoxicating euphoria of existing in the daylight. The final wall fell 2 weeks later. Clara's best friend, Sarah, was coming over for dinner. Sarah had known me since college. She had been a bridesmaid at our wedding. When Clara asked if I wanted to be Lena when Sarah arrived, I nearly threw up. But I also knew I couldn't hide forever. If this was going to be my life, it had to include the people we loved. I spent 2 hours getting ready. I chose a conservative, elegant wrap dress. My makeup was flawless. But when the doorbell rang, my legs almost gave out. Clara opened the door. I stood in the hallway, my hands clasped tightly in front of me, trembling visibly. Sarah stepped inside, holding a bottle of wine. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide, sweeping over my hair, the makeup, the dress. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. I braced myself for the confusion, the awkward laugh, the inevitable, "What the hell is going on, Ethan?" Instead, Sarah set the wine bottle on the console table, walked straight up to me, and wrapped her arms around my neck in a tight, fiercely warm hug. Clara told me. She whispered into my ear. She pulled back, keeping her hands on my shoulders, her eyes completely devoid of judgment. She looked me up and down and let out a low whistle. And she was right. "You have absolutely unfair legs, you bitch." A startled, wet laugh burst out of my chest. The tears spilled over, ruining my mascara. But I didn't care. I hugged her back, burying my face in her shoulder, crying from a relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting off my spine. I didn't hate Ethan. I really didn't. He paid the bills. He navigated the corporate ladder. He protected our life. But he was no longer the dictator of my existence. He was just the armor I wore when the world required it. Beneath the suits, beneath the ties and the forced deep voice, there was a quiet, unshakable softness. Lena wasn't a secret weekend getaway anymore. She wasn't a fetish locked in a box. She was the foundation. And she was finally, beautifully, free. Monday mornings used to just be Monday mornings. A predictable cycle of alarm clocks, stale coffee, and the dull dread of the impending work week. But over the last few months, since the trip to Maui, Monday mornings had become something entirely different. They felt like an amputation. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., staring at the man looking back at me. He was clean-shaven meticulously so, a habit I now guarded with religious fervor, but his jaw was set, his shoulders squared in a way that felt increasingly like a performance. I reached for the navy wool suit hanging on the back of the door. Slipping it on was a sensory shock. For 2.5 days over the weekend, I had existed in soft knit sweaters, high-waisted leggings, and the delicate, weightless embrace of silk bralettes. Lena had spent Sunday afternoon curled up on the sofa reading a book, her painted toes resting in Clara's lap. Now, I was encasing myself in heavy wool and starch cotton. The Windsor knot of my tie felt like a gentle, persistent chokehold. I strapped my heavy steel dive watch to my left wrist, a costume prop, a masculine anchor to convince the world that the man in the mirror was exactly who he appeared to be. "You okay?" Clara's voice was soft, muffled slightly by her toothbrush as she leaned against the doorframe. I met her eyes in the mirror. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah, just shifting gears." She walked over, smelling of mint and the vanilla lotion we now shared, and adjusted the lapel of my jacket. Her fingers lingered against my chest. "He looks very handsome," she whispered, a secret smile playing on her lips. "But tell her I'll miss her today." A sudden sharp ache bloomed behind my ribs. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, grabbing my briefcase before the urge to tear the suit off completely paralyzed me. The office was a sterile, fluorescent-lit purgatory. By 2 p.m., I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room, listening to our VP of sales drone on about Q3 projections and market penetration. I was nodding at the appropriate intervals, jotting down meaningless notes on a legal pad. But a bizarre, dizzying wave of dissociation was washing over me. I looked at my hands resting on the mahogany table. They were large, the knuckles prominent. But the cuticles were perfectly manicured, a subtle remnant of the weekend that I prayed no one would notice. I could feel the sharp, abrasive friction of my wool trousers rubbing against my freshly shaved calves. Beneath the starched white dress shirt and the stiff leather belt, hugging my hips like a tightly kept secret, was a pair of seamless black lace panties. It was my hidden tether, a tiny invisible thread connecting me to the woman I had left at home in the closet. "Ethan, what's your take on the regional numbers?" the VP asked suddenly, his voice snapping me back to reality. I blinked, the corporate mask snapping into place on pure instinct. I cleared my throat, dropping my pitch slightly to hit that resonant, authoritative baritone they expected. "The regional numbers are solid, but we're bleeding efficiency in the logistics chain. If we reroute the distribution..." I listened to the words coming out of my mouth, entirely detached from them. I sounded confident. I sounded like Ethan the manager, but inside, I felt like a ventriloquist dummy. I wasn't this man anymore. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I wasn't just hiding a cross-dressing fetish. I was actively suppressing half of my soul. The meeting ended to a chorus of scraping chairs and forced laughter. I gathered my things, my chest tight, my breathing shallow. I didn't go back to my cubicle. I walked straight to the men's restroom, locked myself in the furthest stall, and slumped against the cool tile wall. The panic was rising, hot and suffocating. Was I losing my mind? Was Ethan fading completely? I couldn't transition, could I? I didn't want to blow up my career, to face the devastating social fallout, to become a spectacle. I liked my life with Clara, but I couldn't keep suffocating Lena for 40 hours a week. The whiplash was going to tear me apart. With trembling hands, I reached into the breast pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out my leather wallet. I flipped it open. Tucked securely behind my driver's license, hidden entirely from the world, was a small, glossy photograph. Clara had taken it on a Polaroid camera during our last night in Maui. I stared at the tiny square. In the photo, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Clara was leaning into the frame, laughing, her hair blowing in the wind. And next to her, looking directly into the lens, was Lena. She was wearing the burgundy dress. Her dark eyes were vibrant, her smile blindingly genuine. There was no fear in her expression, no shame. She looked entirely, beautifully alive. I ran my thumb over the glossy surface, tracing the curve of Lena's smile. The frantic hammering rhythm of my heart began to slow. Looking at the photograph, the terrifying war in my head suddenly went quiet. I didn't have to kill Ethan to let Lena live. Ethan wasn't the enemy. Ethan was the armor that paid the mortgage, that navigated the boardrooms, that protected the soft, vulnerable core of who I really was. He was the heavy, wool-suited knight standing guard outside the castle. And Lena was the light inside it. I took a deep breath, carefully tucking the photo back behind my ID. I smoothed my tie, unlocked the stall door, and walked over to the sinks. I splashed cold water on my face, looking at the man in the mirror. "Just a few more hours, buddy," I whispered to him. "Hold the line." When I finally pulled into our driveway that evening, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of our subdivision. I unlocked the front door and dropped my briefcase in the entryway. The house smelled of garlic, olive oil, and the faint lingering scent of Clara's perfume. I didn't even make it to the kitchen. I stopped in the hallway, shrugged off the heavy suit jacket, and let it fall to the floor. I tore the tie from my neck, unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of my stiff shirt, and kicked off my leather Oxfords. Clara walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She took one look at the discarded clothes, at my exhausted, slumped shoulders, and understood immediately. She didn't ask how the meeting went. She didn't ask about the traffic. She just walked over, wrapped her arms around my neck, and pulled me down into a soft, grounding kiss. "Welcome home," she murmured against my lips. "Go upstairs. Your leggings are on the bed." I poured you a glass of Pinot. 20 minutes later, the armor was gone. I was sitting on the plush rug in the living room, my back resting against the sofa between Clara's legs. I was wearing the black leggings and an oversized, incredibly soft cashmere sweater. My face was bare, but my hair was pulled back with one of Clara's velvet scrunchies. The tightness in my chest had evaporated entirely. Clara was gently running her fingers through my hair, her touch tracing slow, hypnotic circles on my scalp. The jazz music was playing quietly. The wine was warming my blood. "Today was hard," I admitted quietly, staring into the amber liquid in my glass. "I know," Clara replied softly. "I could see it on your face this morning." We sat in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't an anxious silence. It was the quiet, profound peace of a battlefield after the guns have finally been laid down. Clara, I tilted my head back, looking up at her upside down. Where do we go from here? It was the question that had been haunting me since Hawaii. How do we sustain this? How do we balance the man the world demands with the woman my soul desperately needs to be? Clara stopped stroking my hair. She looked down at me, her brown eyes dark and infinitely tender in the dim light of the living room. She didn't have a spreadsheet, a 5-year plan, or a psychological roadmap. She just leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. We go wherever we feel real, she whispered. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against her knee, the ghost of Ethan entirely silent in my mind. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding, I wasn't running, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.